You are live. Awesome. Okay. So let's go ahead and get started on part 3 of the Refiner's Fire series. Had some technical difficulties, but it looks like we figured it out and we are live and ready to go. So last week we talked about being broken. We talked about being broken and the process of being broken and how it's not a fun process. We're also drawing some similarities to the process of refining gold. And so we're just taking a look at taking a deeper dive into how God is making us in this season, how He's shaping us in this season, how He's breaking us in this season, and drawing some similarities back and forth between the process in which gold is refined and how we are refined, and finding some examples in that. If you have not checked out the last series or the last part 2 or even part 1, I encourage you to go back, pause this video, go back and take a look at part 1 and part 2 of this series, so that we can have this dialogue and have this conversation. So excited to have you on, and let's break into this thing. So last week we talked about separation. We talked about being broken, and we talked about how ore, which has materials of gold in it, but it also has other minerals and other impurities within it. And so we talked about how ore is broken apart for the purpose of pulling out that gold, right? And so when we talk about being broken, and how it's not a fun process, and how God takes us through this process in order to pull things out, it is not to hurt us, right? It's not to hurt us. And so this next step, which we're going to talk about, is being separated, or separation process. So once the ore is broken up, once that ore is broken up, and now you've got different fragments of gold and different fragments of minerals in it, and you have different fragments of other things, maybe some impurities or what have you, then those broken pieces are put into what's called a crucible, right? A crucible is it's a ceramic or metal container that substances are put in, like ore. You put the ore into the crucible, and then that crucible is heated with fire. And so what that does is it takes everything that's impure, all the minerals, everything that's not weighted, like gold, because gold has a weight to it, and we'll talk about that in the reveal in part 4. But there's a weight to gold, and when that ore is heated up, what happens is the minerals and impurities don't carry that same weight. The impurities, they have a different weight to it. They have a different feel to it, or what have you, right? And so what happens is that those impurities begin to separate and rise to the surface. They begin to disassociate themselves with the raw material of gold itself. And so just to kind of like bring that back into what we're talking about, the separation process, again, another process that is not fun, another process that we don't willingly invite ourselves into, but is a very necessary process. And sometimes, most times, the separation process doesn't feel good, just like the breaking process. And I think both of these processes have negative connotations in terms of worldly terms or what have you. But being broken before God is exactly where He wants us to be. It's exactly what He wants for our lives. It's exactly how He positions us. In Psalms 51, verse 17, it says the sacrifices of God are a broken spirit and a broken and contrite heart. Oh God, you will not despise. And so when we take the position of being humble, when we take the position, and this is for anyone, this is not just for the worship leader. This is for the servant, for that servant leader that is in that's functioning in the church. When you take that position of being humble before God, when you take the position of allowing God, even though it hurts, allowing Him to break you and to separate you from different things, what the end result, which is what we're going to talk about in our next series, is something that's beautiful, right? It's something that He can use. It's something of value, right? And so let's talk about this separation process. I like how God is separating by fire. Sometimes what happens when we are broken, just like the ore, when we're broken, what happens is He will now put us in a position, just like I was saying, He'll put us in that position, in that crucible, right? He'll put us in there. And then, sometimes we're standing there, and I can remember specific times in my life where I know I'm broken. I'm now aware of what God is doing in my life. And so I'm like, hey, Lord, like, what are you doing in the season? I'm praying for wisdom. I'm praying for protection. I'm praying for knowledge. I'm praying for insight into what's going on, even if there's an assignment before me. And I'm like, hey, like, I need something from you, right? And conversely, God is saying, I need something from you, right? Let's check out what Proverbs 25 verse 4 says. It says, take away the dross from the silver, and there comes out a vessel for the silversmith to shape. So what is dross, right? That was a term I never heard of before. When you're talking about ore, you're talking about gold in the refining process, the material that is being raised to the surface, that is being separated from the gold, is called dross. Dross is pretty much it's rubbish. It's impure material. It's something that's worthless. It's regarded as garbage. It's trash. It's the trash that's raising to the surface, right? And so Proverbs 25:4 says, take away the dross from the silver, right? Another precious metal, another something that's worth value. And there comes out the pure metal for a vessel for the silversmith to shape. So a lot of the times, why is the shaping important? Or why is even the removing so important? What happens is when you shape something, and I'm kind of getting into the next lesson, but when you shape something that is now pliable, what happens is you start to give it identity. You start to identify, or you start to conform to the identity of the shaper, of what the shaper wants you to be. You begin, so whether that's, there's multiple people that may be watching this. You're a servant leader, or you're a worshiper, or you're a pastor, or you work in the media department, or you're working in evangelism, what have you. When you let God do the shaping and the removing, the separating, right? Then you become something that He can now shape and direct, right? And so many times what happens is we will go ahead and we'll ask for wisdom, we'll ask for provision, we'll ask for favor, right? And instead of getting those things that we think it should look like, instead of getting what we think provision should look like, or what we think protection or favor should look like, we get fire, right? We get fire because we are now in this crucible. We're broken before God. We're in different seasons of our lives, or what have you, where we are, we're like ore. Like in the last episode, I said how it is possible to still serve in a capacity, in a leadership, especially in a leadership role, and still have some dross, still have some impurities, still have some things that are not given over to God, that are not submitted to God. So when we start to pray for these things and we're like, Lord, I need this, I need that, or what have you, he gives us what? Instead of what we think it should be, he gives us fire. Like, he gives us fire underneath the crucible to remove, to separate those things, right? So we expect wisdom, but instead we get fire. We expect knowledge, but instead we get fire. Instead, we expect to get what others are getting around us, what we see. My kids do this all the time. They'll see one child with a popsicle. All of a sudden, everybody wants a popsicle. But instead, I'm glad God doesn't treat us like this, because sometimes when we ask for certain things, he'll give us fire. He'll say, you know what, son, daughter, I'm working on you. Let me remove some things so that I can shape you, right? So what do I mean by fire? He's melting away your unwillingness to give. He's melting away worldly wisdom. He's melting away worldly practices and common knowledge and distrust and doubt. He's melting away jealousy. He's melting away those lustful desires. He's melting away greed and pride. He's melting all that stuff, or not melting, but he's bringing it to the surface. There's something about getting in God's presence that helps you to recognize where you're short, where you're falling short. He brings a certain awareness to you that should bring you to repentance. And so he gives us fire, right? Ephesians 4:22 through 24, if you can write this down, it says to put off your old self, which belongs to your former manner of life and is corrupt through deceitful desires, and to be renewed in the spirit of your minds, and to put on the new self, created after the likeness of God in true righteousness and holiness. In the last episode, we talked about being shaped and being refined so that you can submit your offering, so that you can submit your gift, your talent, in righteousness, right? You won't be like Saul, being halfway obedient, right? Being only doing what feels good, or taking some of the credit, or what have you, pretty much being disobedient. We won't be like that if we allow the process of being broken and being separated from those things to happen, right? So one thing that I noticed in this process for myself and my own testimony is that he separated me from thoughts, from habits, from certain addictions, or even idols. There's some things that you know, when you give yourself over to a certain thing more so than you give to God, that thing is an idol for you. When you hold it up to a certain standard, whatever that thing is, he's separating you from those things. Those things are in direct opposition of who he is shaping you to be. And so what happens is that gold starts to fall to the bottom, right? It becomes like a liquid, in a liquid form. That fire is hot, and you're going. Just imagine yourself. You're in this crucible. You're in this situation. You're in this confrontation, or what have you. It does not feel good, but all the while that you're going through this thing, God is doing a work in you, right? Each layer of dross, and that's that impure substance, each layer of that dross requires more intense levels of heat to remove. So this is not a quick thing. Sometimes we think that deliverance can be a quick thing. We come to Jesus and somebody prays, and then you feel the Spirit moving, and you think that's it. Sometimes it could be years of removing. Sometimes it could be years of coming into the understanding of who God is, and developing trust and faith in what he's doing in the process. He uses these seasons of affliction to refine us. And how do I know that? Well, in Isaiah 48 verse 10, it says, "See, I have refined you though not as silver, I have tested you in the furnace of affliction. Sometimes we have the wrong perspective for our problems and our issues that we go through. I know personally, so I'll tell this quick testimony. There's for the longest time, for more than 10 years, I've been trying to buy a house, and could not understand why I couldn't qualify for it, right? And I went through the process, and it was a grueling process, and it got everything in line for me to do this thing, and I think everything that I went through helped shape me to get me to that point. But there came a point in the process of home buying where I had to absolutely 100% trust God, because I had done everything that I could possibly do, submitted every piece of paperwork that I could submit, and it came to the point where I had to leave it in God's hands, and 100% leave it in God's hands. And I believe He was trying to remove or separate me from distrust. I'm a very hard. I trust very hard, and when I lose trust in something or what have you, it's and sometimes we can, not without even knowing what we're doing, we could misplace our trust in God, who created the heavens and earth, who is provider over everything, and we don't trust Him the way that we should trust Him, right? And so He wants to remove that doubt from us. Doubt can be very infectious and it can sow seeds of things inside you that can create fear. It can create just different things that can stifle your faith. And so for me, I believe it was doubt. And when I saw God come through, after I 100% trusted Him in that process, it was a game changer, and I'll never forget it. And so through all of this, through being broken, through being separated from mentalities and ways of thinking that will stifle your faith, you have to remember what Isaiah 43 says. It says, when you pass through the waters, and this is Isaiah 43 verse 2, when you pass through the waters, I will be with you, and through the rivers, they will not overwhelm you. When you walk through fire, listen, when you walk through fire, you will not be scorched, nor will the flame burn you. You have to understand that what God is doing in you and through you is good for you, because He's a good God, and He wants the best for you. He wants to see you come out like pure gold. I know this one was a little lengthy, but this process in and of itself can be a lengthy process of separation. Sometimes the breaking process is like bam, and then you're thrown into a crucible where it can take it could be layers and layers of things that God wants to pull out of you in order to pull what He wants out of you, which is pure gold. So I hope you were really blessed by this. If you haven't subscribed to this channel, we'd love to have you subscribe, hit the notification bell. We're going to be doing worship night on May 29th, right here live on Facebook. I want you guys to join us and be blessed. All right.